What is up, everybody? It's Tyler with Hooksets Are Free. Welcome back to the channel. Welcome back to another live stream. It's about 9:15 p.m. here on Saturday night, April 2nd, 2022. So, hope you guys are doing well. And if you're watching this back on the replay, do me a favor, hit that thumbs up button and comment down below for the sake of the algorithm. Let me know if you've had the opportunity to go out fishing yet this season, and if you've caught any fish just yet, what you're using, and what your weather is like. Because I'm finding that is kind of what separates most of us this time of year, is that you know it, conditions really vary depending on where you're located in the country. Like I was just watching Debo's live stream, an hour ago or whatever, and Rich from Hellabass was mentioning that he is still waiting on his waters to thaw. He lives up in the north, I should say. I think he's like in Illinois or something like that. I should know that. Minnesota, I think. I think he's near Omnia, works with Omnia Fishing, but they're still frozen up there. So a little bit surprising. The waters here have been thawed out for the last couple of weeks, but I've only had the opportunity to get out twice and have yet to catch my first bass of the year. So, last year and the year before that, I had caught fish in the month of March, but sometimes that's just the way that it goes. So whether you're watching this on the replay or you're in here live right now, like Eliza and Grayson, what's up, guys? How you doing? Let me know. Have you been out fishing yet this year? And have you been catching them? Eliza says, oh, yes. Been killing it with a shiner chatterbait and a trickworm. Post spawn here in Florida. Okay, so see, that's the opposite end of the spectrum as, say, Rich from Hellabass. And kind of what I'm talking about is that for Rich and for myself and a lot of other anglers who are in cold areas, the water is still frigid cold. We're really not going to experience the spawn until, say, the tail end of May. And so post spawn, and what Eliza is experiencing right now in late March, early April, is what we will get in late May, early June. So we are a full 2 months apart when it comes to conditions. So for me, pre-spawn does not really seem to be going yet. If I had to guess, and I did not bring a thermometer with me when I went out fishing the other day for about 2 hours, I would say that the water temps are in the mid 40s. I don't know that for certain, but it is still very cold, windy, dirty, stained. It is kind of that early season stuff. So the bite is going to be few and far between. And I would expect that in the next couple of weeks, pre-spawn will really start kicking up. And then most of April and the first half of May is when everything is going to be kind of prime time for me, and when I will be targeting arguably my biggest bass of the year. Though I don't necessarily go into the pre-spawn with that expectation that's when I'm going to catch my biggest fish. I just know that that's when I could or can catch my biggest fish. So I need to plan accordingly. So Grayson says, I caught a fish today on a jerkbait. We're in pre-spawn. Black and blue. A black and blue jerkbait or what? Oh, a jerkbait you made. Black and blue jerkbait. That's pretty sweet, man. Eliza says, I can wade in shorts, LOL. Well, that sounds epic and definitely something that I'm not going to have the opportunity to do until June or so, just because it doesn't get hot enough, air temps or water temps to be able to do that until kind of true summertime. So, unlike what most people would think, here in Colorado, it actually does get really hot in the summertime. It's just dry here. So we get extreme temps on both ends of the spectrum. So I mean, it's not Arizona, but we definitely do get our fair share of, um, 100-degree days in the summertime. I want to say 2 summers ago, it was 100 plus degrees Fahrenheit, like every day in July. There might have been one day in July that was not. So from June to August, we get really warm weather most of the time. We'll get kind of these afternoon rainstorms somewhat frequently, but it is hot and it's dry. And then, it's the opposite in the winter. It's cold and it's snowy. So we truly experience all 4 seasons here in Colorado. A lot of people don't quite understand or just know that. Most people assume it's cold here all the time, being that the mountains are so close. What's up, South Jersey Fisherman 028? How you doing, Matt? Good to see you in here, dude. We're just going to talk about spring fishing tonight, spring fishing tactics. Um, I suppose we'll kind of start with my homemade baits that I've been making recently, as well as just kind of what I used the other day and what I had the opportunity to try out and see kind of how they work and what my first impressions are of the baits. Now, that said, I already admitted that I did not catch a fish in the 2 hours I went fishing day before yesterday. And yeah, then obviously I didn't catch a fish when I was out with my 1-year-old and my 4-year-old for about 20 minutes a week ago. So I've only gotten 2 short outings on the water so far, but I've used a bunch of different baits so far, and mostly just for the sake of getting a feel for uh, how those baits act in the water and when and where I'm going to use them. So let's start out with a couple of my homemade flat sides that I made to really imitate the Rapala OG Slim Tiny. So this is the Tiny 4. Pretty simple color pattern, yet a popular one at that. And this is the Big Shad color. So we got that, purple iridescent back with a little bit of green shimmer on it. Got that silver side with that yellow line down the side and kind of a greenish black bottom, almost like a gray. And so here is my, not so great, but a decent first attempt at an imitation of that bait. So I've got the more blue than it is purple, I suppose, on the back, silver on the side, got that yellow line, and then just kind of dashed some black nail polish on the belly. So if I put these side to side, you'll be able to see that size wise, they're pretty dang similar. So I'm fairly happy with that and the fact that the profile is pretty close. However, I did make a mistake in uh, creating this specific bait. So one, you'll see that the line tie on the OG is just above the bill, whereas on the one that I made, it's too high up on the bait. And not just that, but I've started making my own hook hangers and line ties. And the issue with that is that I'm using a like medium gauge wire and then I'm twisting it up with like a drill. And so some of these turn out just fine, right? Hope that's not one of my kids. But a mistake that I made on this bait is that the line tie itself in the front is actually like twisted. I don't know if you can see that, but there you can see it. It's like bent. If you think about how it was twisting, um, it's not perfectly in line. So that was a big mistake, and this thing doesn't want to run right at all. It lays on its side almost immediately, and I think the way that I weighted it, it's maybe a little bit too light. So anyway, it's a learning experience more than anything. But I think this thing looks okay, right? Not my best first try, but also not the worst. So I'll take the hooks and split rings off of this thing, and I'll try again. But I did make another one that worked out pretty well, that was made to imitate the bait that I showed you guys last week in the Evergreen Flat Force 4. So now I took the same profile as the OG Slim, same size as the Slim. So it is a smaller profile than the Flat Force. That's on par with this first one I showed you. And I tried to imitate that color pattern. Again, not my best work per se, but also not not too shabby. Got that fire orange belly, red back, black eyes, and I'm fairly happy with this thing, and I'm even more happy that it runs really well. So you can see that, I wasn't actually looking at this bait the whole time that I was making it when I just designed the color pattern. It's fairly close when it comes to design, but um, this thing has a really cool flashing action to it. I don't know if it's the angle of the bill or what about it, but it has a really good flashing. It probably dives 3 or so feet deep. And as you would suspect, being made out of balsa, this thing has a super high float on it. So um, I was very happy with it, and I'll probably cut up some of this video footage, but I'll just show you guys real quick. I'm not sure if you'll be able to see this very well. Yep. I probably need to chop down this video footage. I was wanting to just see kind of how she runs. And yeah, again, this is not a great angle. Plus, I was just pulling it next to where I was standing. So it didn't really have a good chance to catch it on video, like just what the consistent action looks like. So I'm pulling and stopping it. You can see how quickly it floats back up. But this thing has a really good roll to it. And so far, I'm happy with this thing. I know I can catch fish on it, and I'm excited to give it a try. I weighted this thing a little bit more appropriately, um, in front and behind that first hook hanger. Whereas before, I had just been weighting this thing behind that front hook hanger, and yeah, the line tie and everything. So I'm learning a little bit, but figuring it out. So I'm excited to try that out. Losing big fish. How do I not remember your name, man? I'm so sorry. What's your name, dude? Ruben says I like the red hook on that crankbait. Well, I appreciate that. Yeah, I like throwing red hooks on some of my crankbaits for sure, especially on the front hook. Really, never on the rear hook. I will throw feathered trebles on the rear hooks of some of my crankbaits. Usually, it's more of a jerk bait or a topwater walking bait type of thing, but I will do it on some crankbaits as well. Eliza says, "Aren't those parts available to purchase?" Um, Yes, they are. I just I haven't purchased anything online just yet. I bought everything just straight up from the hardware store or from Hobby Lobby. So I bought some balsa wood, and I did have some larger line ties, ring eyes that I had bought from the hardware store, but they're too big for a bait this small. So on, say, my first edition crankbait that I made, that was quite a bit larger, and I've got them upstairs in my office. So I apologize for not being able to show you right now, but I was able to screw those in, and those worked just fine. But no, I'm kind of practicing figuring out how to make my own because I can make them a lot cheaper. They're pretty straightforward to make when you just cut down the wire, twist it up, it can control the size of the eye that you want, and yeah. So I'm practicing, but we'll see. Eventually, I might just buy some stuff in bulk to be able to make more stuff, because one thing that I am lacking is computer chip circuit board material for cutting lips out. At this point, I've really only got uh, I forget even what this is called, polycarbonate. And you can see I made this into a square bill, whereas I made the slim into more of a round bill. But yeah, I'm doing everything by hand right now. I don't really have any big power tools when it comes to like a bandsaw, um, or a belt sander or anything like that. So those things would be a huge benefit to me. But I don't know just how serious I am about getting into lure making as a whole. It is very time consuming. And so, I don't have an airbrush. I don't have big tools. I'm doing everything by hand, just using, um, paint pens and nail polish, things like that. So that's why it looks a little bit rougher, because I'm not even using stencils. I'm literally doing all this by hand. So yeah, this Guggen Slayer, yes, this is balsa wood specifically. So yes. Matt says, if you want, look at Ott Defoe's How to Make a Crankbait videos. They're pretty good for learning. Interesting. I don't think I've actually seen those, but that's good to know. Thank you for the heads up. Gators Adventures, what's up, dude? Not too much. We are just chilling and talking fishing tonight. Hope all's going well on your end, man. So let's move on to talking about kind of what else I have used this past week and what my impressions are of them, because I've got a lot of baits that are new to me this year, that I'm wanting to really get the hang of and figure out whether they're going to have a true place and a home in my arsenal. You guys know by now that I like to try new things and try not to be too stuck in my ways, if you will. I think it's easy for us fishermen and fisherwomen to kind of figure out what works and then to stick with that, because if it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? And to a certain extent, that's true. But at the same time, um, I think a big part of what makes fishing fun is trying new things, and it's a blast to track all of the new products that come out every year, at the Bassmaster Classic, at ICAST, etc., all throughout the year. And not even just that, but new color patterns of existing baits, new sizes of existing baits. Just little things. I like to tinker. I like to continue learning in this adventure called bass fishing. So um, there are a handful of baits that I've been wanting to make a point to try out this spring, and you know, there were a couple that I got a chance to try out. So I'll explain kind of my first impressions of them. I want to say they were like 5 or 6, probably. All right. See, now this is the danger of going fishing, because then all of a sudden my tackle boxes start to look like everybody else's when I take those rubber bands off and the hooks start all fouling up together. But you guys know that I like to use these little rubber bands just like kids' hair ties. And what I'll do is grab the hooks, put them together, and then I will wrap that business around there. And there you go. Those hooks are just tied together, and I can set this in my box and it won't tangle up with other baits. So that's how I store all of my baits in all of my boxes, you know. And I can fit so many more baits in here, and I can pull them out at will whenever I want. So if you guys didn't already know that, that's a little hack of mine. So all right, 6 baits that I have tried in the last week, just mostly for the sake of trying them out. And these all kind of fit into, let's say, the categories of what I see as kind of some of the best early spring techniques. Now, these a lot of these techniques carry over to be year-round techniques, but these are really things that I wanted to cover in tonight's live stream, is just kind of like a, best tactics for early spring fishing, whether that is pre-spawn or pre-spawn. We're talking about before you get into the spawn and bed fishing. So no, Matt, I did not. Honestly, I will not be throwing a traditional square bill for probably another few weeks or a month at least. With it being a fairly wide wobbling, wide body square bill crankbait, I don't see myself using it for a little while. I'm going to stick to some of these other more cold water appropriate techniques, let's say. So, first is a lipless crankbait. You'll be able to see that I actually have kind of beat this thing up a little bit, not a lot, but I've made some decent contact with rocks and the bottom, and gotten this thing hung once or twice, but obviously got it back. And so I'm fishing this where it needs to be fished, and gave it a fair shot 2 different times. But I really like this bait. So this is the Lucky Craft LV 150 lipless crankbait, which is essentially the same design as its bigger brother in the LV 500. Ow. Doesn't feel great. But you'll see it's in a smaller profile. So you get the same internals, same sound and everything. You get the brass and glass that you get in the LV 500, which is a 3-inch long, 3/4 ounce bait in a smaller package. So most people, including myself, would associate the LV 500 with a deep water technique of throwing a lipless crankbait. So this is primarily a heavy bait that will get down to the bottom fast. It's going to fall fast, and then you're going to work this thing either slowly along the bottom, swimming it and ripping it up, or you're just going to yo-yo it and kind of fish it like you would a jig almost. You're just going to pull it up and feel that thing vibrate a couple of times, let it fall back down and crash to the bottom. This thing will rest nose down for a second before it falls over. And so you kind of want to work this thing relatively quickly. But its smaller brother in the LV150 is pretty awesome in that it doesn't fall quite as fast. Um, it is going to get the fish's attention more and give them time to eat it on the fall as it's swimming down to the bottom and fluttering down. But then you can fish it the same way if you want, just a little bit more slowly because it'll take longer for this thing to get to the bottom and it will take less force, lighter line to get it to do the same work in pulling it up off the bottom, just kind of yo-yoing it off the bottom, or better yet, and what I've been doing mostly with this thing so far is just fishing it on a straight retrieve. Um, it's going to swim at about a, I don't know, 45, 60. And so it's relatively weedless, and it's got a strong vibration. It's got a loud sound to it, and I think for a straight retrieve bait, this is going to make its way into my arsenal pretty quickly. So, so far so good. I've not had many issues. I feel like I can control the depth pretty well and keep that thing running anywhere from you know 4 to 8 feet deep pretty dang well without having to burn it. Whereas with the LV500, if you want to keep that thing shallow at all, you really have to be cranking that thing in, like burning it. So I don't prefer to burn a lipless crankbait most of the time. If anything, I'll be fishing it at like a medium to medium fast retrieve. And yeah, so far so good on that lipless crankbait. Of course, I also did throw the red eye shad a little bit. I've got dirtier water, so I've got two colors. One I already had tied on from the end of last season. This is the green tomato color. It's one of my favorites. And this is the standard half-ounce red eye shad. You get a much higher pitch with the BBs in there. And this thing is known for its shimmy and flutter on the fall. So I cast this thing way out there, let it fall, and then I will retrieve it at kind of a straight medium speed retrieve most of the way back to me. And then as it gets closer to the bank, then I'll start kind of hopping it while I'm retrieving it, never quite letting this thing fall all the way to the bottom. And then I've got the tungsten 2-tap in this natural shad color. I don't even think that I threw this the other day, but that's just because I switched up pretty quickly away from the lipless crank the other day. I was just more curious to try other things. And then the jerk bait is an infamous technique, right? Let me catch up on these comments real quick. Matt says, all good, man. Was just wondering. I've noticed that Squarebill does very well in pretty cold water and in warm water since it has a tight wobble, but super hard, and it wiggles back up like a Senko. Well, that sounds interesting. It wiggles back up like a Senko. All right, well, I will definitely take it out to at least see how it runs soon. And while the water is fairly stained for me, I would think that this guy, the rainbow color, could and should be a good one to be throwing. So I appreciate the info and the advice, and I will give it a shot for sure. Adam says, do you all set up boxes for Texas rigs? Wacky Nico. Short answer is yes, but more in the way of terminal boxes than for baits. So I've talked about it before. I like these Flambeau. This is the What size is this? I don't even know. But here's an example of one that I've got with some drop shot weights and some Jika rigs that I've made. So Jika rig and like free rig is kind of essentially what I've got this box for. But also just drop shot in general. So I'll load these boxes up with all sorts of different terminal tackle, and I don't have them all here right now. Most of them are in the garage from last season. But what I will do is load them up with the proper terminal tackle for that technique. So for Nico, for example, I will put nail weights and these, Nico weights made by Z-Man in. I will put some Nico hooks in. I will put some O-rings, kind of anything that you would need terminal wise for a Nico rig in there. Or what I do is I'll use, yikes, just throwing stuff all around. Or I'll use one of these boxes. These are the Z-Man. No, they're not. This is just a Plano box that is dual-sided. So on one side, they've got 4 compartments, and on the other, they've got just kind of one big open compartment. And so you can fit a lot of terminal tackle in those. And then on average, you can fit about 4 or 5 bags of soft plastics in one side. So this is like a 3,600 deep size box, and I can bring like 10 bags of soft plastics and some terminal tackle. But quite honestly, what I do more frequently is I will just pack a Ziploc bag full of soft plastic baits. And this is more what I do these days, because what I used to do was just have these boxes dedicated for different plastics, right? Like this is just straight up creature baits. So I've got, rage bugs, bandito bugs, reaction innovations, man bear pigs, zoom z craws, lizards, and brush hogs. And I've got the same thing for craws. I've got the same thing for jig trailers. And so I do keep some soft plastics in dedicated boxes like Ned rig baits and things like that. But I don't do it as much with Texas rig baits, because more and more I've gone to different or more out there types of soft plastic baits. So when it comes to um, the soft plastics, I will stuff them in my backpack, and then terminal tackle I will load up into these smaller boxes so that I'm not taking up quite as much room in my bag, because I used to just use this straight up 3,600 size Plano box. And I found that it took up a little too much space and still didn't hold everything that I wanted it to. So, in here I've got like swim bait hooks, EWG hooks, flipping hooks, swim bait heads, some nail weights, some spinner blades, and some tungsten weights and bobber stops. So, I have like a decent amount of stuff. My base is covered in there, but there's still a fair amount in the way of like drop shot, Ned rig stuff that I don't carry in that box. So what I do is just load up one of these for each technique, and then I just plan ahead for what I'm going to be doing that day, and I'll bring a couple of those boxes in my bag with me, and that usually does the trick for me. And you guys know by now that what I'll do is take a couple of like 3,600 size Plano or Flambeau boxes and load them up just randomly. Like in here, I've got, a baby bull shad and a BX brat and a bunch of lipless crankbaits, a hair jig, a bunch of flat sides, and some jerk baits. And I can kind of have most of what I need, just, a couple of everything. And that covers most of my bases. So hope that answers your question, Adam. Matt says, yeah, that rainbow gets bit for sure. And I mean, it wiggles back up like how a Senko falls on a wacky rig, almost rocks back and forth. Yeah, no, I understood what you were saying. It just was hard to visualize it in my head that a crankbait would kind of have that like shimmy as it's coming up. But I get it. That's cool, man. Guggen Slayer says jigs are killer right now. Yeah, no doubt. I actually was throwing a jig the other day. I still have it tied on my rod. Um, I want to say it's the 6 cents. I forget what they call their like do everything jig. Um, but I really like that jig. I probably have a couple that I could show you guys. Just not quite sitting right here in front of me, and my jig box is kind of evading me at the moment because I was playing around with it recently. So I don't know where it is, but yeah, I was throwing that with a Guggenbaits Rattling Ned. I'd had that jig rigged up from last season and had some good success on it last year. So since I had it with me, I just decided to toss it around since some people in my area had put some trees and bushes in near the bank, like they had thrown it out on top of the ice, and so it was not there last season. It was blatantly there when I got there just this past week, and so I felt the need to kind of explore those bushes, those laydowns, and I wasn't about to do it with a lipless crankbait or a jerkbait. So, yeah, we'll talk about jerkbaits next because there were a couple that I did have the chance to check out that I purchased in the off season in the past couple of months and have been excited to see what they're actually like. So, Eliza says, I've never thrown a swim jig and I'm going to start here soon. Well, holy hot damn, Eliza. Yeah, if you're living in Florida, you most definitely should be. I assume you throw a chatterbait, right? As well as a swim bait. Or you tell me kind of what are your preferences when it comes to techniques? Because you definitely need to be throwing a swim jig in addition. Um, and it doesn't quite matter what kind you use. Like I really do like the 6 cents Divine swim jigs. Here's what that bait looks like. Now I added a queen tackle switchblade to it to turn it into a chatterbait, but the 6 cents Divine swim jig comes with a big like 4 or 5/0 hook on it that is somewhere between a medium and medium heavy gauge wire, solid weed guard that's not too stiff. Obviously, great skirts as 6 cents is known for, and then it has a screw lock bait keeper on it. So I think they did a lot right with this swim jig, and I also like the shape of the head, just like their Divine swim bait heads, which I've got one sitting right here. It's got a great profile on it. It's got kind of a keeled, flatter bottom. It's got that 90-degree line tie. Actually, the swim jig does not. But the swim bait head does. But it's got that screw lock keeper on it. Just kind of a different shaped head. Comes through grass well. And yeah, the one that I have purchased this year and I'm going to use quite a bit as perhaps my go-to swim jig is going to be the Evergreen Grass Ripper. So this is like a $7 swim jig but has a great head design as well. It's got that same hook, that Gamakatsu hook that's on the Jackhammer Chatterbait, and the same bait keeper as well. I haven't trimmed down this weed guard, but I will just a little bit because in my opinion, this is just a little bit long. Trim about a 1/4 inch off of that bad boy and be good to go. But I did fish it in black and blue a little bit at the end of last season. But you need to be throwing a swim jig. That's for sure. You say you're finesse before power, but you're trying to power fish more. Okay, I hear you. So what are you throwing? Flukes, worms, drop shots? I mean, what if you're in Florida? I assume you have grass. So like, what are you fishing for the most part, Eliza? Donnie Davidson. Ooh, Justin. Wait, why does your name say Donnie Davison? I thought your name was Justin, Mr. Pickle Throw. You say, what perfect time at talking about a bait that I forced on you. Yeah, um, you did. So, Eliza, that's kind of exactly what I would have assumed. Flukes and trick worms, right? Pretty typical stuff. So you throw a lot of zoom, throw a lot of gambler. Um, you know, you ought to expand your horizons a little bit. Um, so yeah, the cool thing about a swim jig is it's essentially, it should be a little backwards if you've already thrown a chatterbait before a swim jig. Essentially, you can think of the swim jig as just a finesse version of the chatterbait. But most people are the opposite. They throw a swim jig first, or they throw a jig and swim it. Doesn't quite matter. People just used to use archy heads and swim them through the water column before proper swim jigs were created. But a bladed jig is essentially just a bladed swim jig. That's all that a chatterbait is. And so that's how you ought to think about and utilize a swim jig, is where you're fishing the chatterbait. You can fish it in the same places, targeting those same fish, but just with a quieter presentation. And you can use a little bit wider variety of trailer because you don't have that blade disturbing the water, creating um, that movement that will mess up some trailers behind a chatterbait. So, I like to use either a craw or a swim bait on the back of a swim jig first and foremost. And, I think a paddle tail swim bait is really the best imitator of a bait fish. So that the skirt is really just giving you that secondary action and a little bit more bulk than a traditional swim bait head would do. So, you just imagine having a skirt over the top of this, and that's what you get with a swim jig. It's just most swim jigs also have a weed guard on them. And so that's really the only difference, is it's a skirted swim bait head. Um, but I like to throw a swim jig, not just in grassy areas, but in shallow water. And I like to throw them in light weights. Like a 1/4 ounce is typically what I'm throwing when it comes to a swim jig. And I'm fishing it higher in the water column, usually on a faster retrieve. So in a lot of the same areas and same ways that I would fish a spinner bait is how I'm fishing a swim jig, just toward the top of the water column in that top 12 to 6 inches where I can see the bait tracking back to me so that it's a visual eat. Um, I'm with you there, Eliza. I also rarely throw a spinner bait, but I did throw one on the other day to just see if I could get a bite as a last resort. I was not expecting to fish a spinner bait by any means. So Frank Doucette, what's up, dude? How you doing? You say, I love that grass ripper jig. It gets through the vegetation in my favorite ponds when no other swim jigs will. Well, that's good to know. All right. Matt, we don't need to talk about the Depths Matsuraba swim jig. Sorry, not sorry. Donnie says, Donnie, Justin, I feel like swim jigs are for clear water. Not sure why I think that. Um, no, I mean, I don't think they're necessarily just for clear water, but you probably think that because they have a generally more subtle action. So when we're in stained or dirty water, we tend to think of throwing something with more vibration or with more noise or just a brighter color. So of course you could throw a chartreuse and white swim jig in stained or dirty water. You could throw something like the uh, that Megabass swim jig, which honestly I prefer to just kind of make my own when it comes to that. So let's see if I have a good example in here. And of course I don't. They're in my other box, but uh, maybe I have some of these. All right. Let's do a little demonstration, hey? All right, let's go with bluegill color. And let's think about a swim bait. So I'm just going to use a Kitech 3.8 in a Houdini color. And I'm going to put it on this Evergreen grass ripper. Let's first take off the hook guard on this bait. Line this biatch up. And we're going to thread her on. Wow. This is a pretty horrible thread job. Like really horrible thread job. Okay. A little bit better there. So 3.8 inch on the back of this. I will trim this skirt down just a little bit, but essentially got a bluegill colored swim jig with a bluegill colored swim bait. And then what I'll do is I will take a spinner blade and I will screw this thing into the belly of the swim bait. And this is an accessory made by a small company out of California that I don't know years ago was recommended by like Tactical Bass and it's a company called Pro Point Lures. It's essentially what you get here is like an underspin swim jig type of deal where this spinner blade is going to trail underneath the tail and behind the skirt. So Megabass makes a swim jig that is awfully expensive. It's like 12 bucks. That essentially is that. It's a hybrid between a swim jig and a spinner bait, or an underspin rather, because the blade is below. But in my opinion, it's just a little bit expensive for my taste. So I'd rather go with something like the grass ripper and then an accessory blade to do that. So to get at your point, Justin, I think you can certainly use a swim jig in dirtier water. Um, it's just you're going to want to use either a trailer that's going to put out more vibration or a spinner blade or you're going to want to work the bait a little bit faster or use brighter colors. Um, and there's absolutely no issue with that. I think you'll get bit really well in stained and dirty water on a swim jig. Just depends on how you're using it. Megaforce, Mark, what's up, dude? You say good info. It's like I'm in fishing college. Well, that's funny. I appreciate you saying that. Justin says, ain't nobody trying to throw a $12 jig into cover, bro. Yeah. Well, that Matt is. Matt likes to throw all the bougie JDM stuff for sure. Tom Mix in the house. Don't sell yourself short. Dirty jig, swim jig, it's money too. Yeah, that is a fact. That's the other jig that I throw a fair amount. Although, for me, that jig has a little bit too heavy gauge of a hook on it. So that's why I slightly prefer, this Grass Ripper and the 6 Sense Divine swim jig, is that they both have like a medium heavy gauge wire, and that is kind of my preference. Now, I used to throw straight up like the Strike King tour grade swim jig, which has a very narrow head on it, comes to a real point to it, and it's got a light wire hook on there, and I like that. So for a while, I had a lot of confidence in that bait, but I think there's a middle ground in like a medium wire hook that is ideal on a swim jig, at least for me. And that Dirty Jig swim jig is a gaff of a hook for sure, but it's well made, no doubt. Adam says, Tyler, what trailers do you put on your swim jigs? So I think I just answered that, but primarily I'm throwing paddle tail swim baits, where I would not throw them on a chatterbait unless I'm throwing it upside down. You can see on this homemade chatterbait, I've taken a Kitech 3.8 and I've rigged it with the tail upside down. So that will work well in counteracting the turbulence, if you will, that the blade makes in the water. But on a swim jig, I will throw a paddle tail swim bait rigged normally, probably 60% of the time, maybe even a little bit more. And then after that, I'm mostly throwing like a cross style bait. It doesn't quite matter which one you throw. So like I used to throw the Rage Bug and the Rage Menace Grub a lot. Still do, but have kind of been playing around a little bit more. I also use the Zoom Ultra Vibe Speed Craw a fair amount. So yeah, that Rage Menace Grub though is still underrated, even though everybody knows about it, everybody likes it. And if you don't use it, you should. Because you can rig this thing like so, and it's going to have more of a traditional kick, or you can rig it vertically, and it's going to have more of a bait fish swim to it. And so I really like the versatility that the Rage Menace Grub has. And I've been a big fan of it for, I don't know, the last 4 or 5 seasons for sure. And so now that Z-Man makes the GOAT, which is essentially just an Elastec version of that same bait, I've been using it a fair amount just because you don't need to change out the trailer. So this is that baby goat. And, they make it in all 3 sizes. So a 3-inch, a 4-inch, and like a 4.5 or 5-inch with the billy goat. So one other bait that is new that I think I'm going to start using more frequently on a swim jig is the Z-Man Turbo Fatties. So essentially just using like a swimming worm. You think about using like a ultra vibe speed worm, for example, or the rage cutter worm, and cut it down a little while, and then you get a swimming worm behind that'll give you just a little bit different of an action. Um, but I don't usually throw straight tail trailers on swim jigs. I throw something that's going to give it more action. Justin says, got my jackhammer box filled out. Well, sweet, dude. I don't think you will regret that. Do you have all of the colors filled out? Is the question. I have my Heights Hot Craw color rigged upstairs with one of those Rage Menace grubs matching in the Falcon Lake Craw. I brought that out the other day. Didn't end up tying it on. But let's move on and talk about jerk baits, because I wanted to address a couple of baits that we've been talking about and people are curious about. I was curious about and still am. But I've got a little bit of insight on them. So Michael says, how's it going, Tyler? Nice to catch you live. Have you got out on the water yet? What baits around here are you going to do the most with this month? So, right, that's exactly what this live stream is about, man. I have only been out twice. I went out for 2 hours the other day, and I went out for like 30 minutes last weekend. So, no, I haven't really had an opportunity to do any legitimate fishing. The other day when I went out, it was blowing like crazy. The wind was insane and made things a little bit challenging for me. It was also kind of chilly. So, no, I fully intend to get out doing quite a bit more fishing coming this month. But we already talked about the lipless crankbait. Now we're going to talk about the jerk bait. Then we'll talk about the flat-sided crankbait. Then we'll talk about swim bait, and then perhaps a chatterbait or an underspin. Those are pretty much going to be what I spend most of my time on when the water is in the 40s and just kind of cresting over 50. And then I'll probably shift my strategy as the water is in the 50s, approaching 60 for most of the tail end of April and all of May leading up to the spawn. Because in my experience, the last couple of years, the spawn hasn't really happened until like late May and through June, at least in my experience. So, Justin, Bandito bug is all you need. Yeah, I don't know about all that. All right. So, jerkbait, right? Megabass Vision 110 is perhaps the most well-regarded jerkbait on the market. Everybody knows that. But not everybody's always willing to pay the price for it. The Vision 110 has a very crisp action that excels in cold water. It suspends remarkably well. It has a very, I don't want to say aggressive, but it has a very crisp darting action where it's super responsive. And so it fishes kind of just like you would want it to when you're trying to fish a jerkbait slow. So that is crucial, especially for most people who consider a jerkbait to be kind of a cold water application, more or less a 1 or 2 season type of bait. So the Vision 110 is a $25 bait retail. Some places sell it for more than that. And it is like a half-ounce jerkbait. So it casts really well. It's got an internal weight transfer system, and it dives some 4 to 6 or maybe even 7 feet deep, and it gets down to depth pretty quickly and will stay there. So if you're using anywhere in the ballpark of 12-pound line, 10 or 12-pound line, it's going to get down to its maximum depth. If you're throwing it on heavier line like 15, you might be able to keep it at 4 or 5 feet. But One thing that I really like is the Vision 110 Junior. And a reason for that is that it's a smaller profile, yet still has 3 hooks on it. It dives a little bit shallower and therefore is just a hair more friendly to bank anglers, and it represents a smaller bait fish. So, um, let's be honest, I fish smaller lakes and reservoirs and a fair amount of ponds as well. So when I'm throwing a jerk bait, um, a lot of times I'm fishing in shallower water or around bait fish or more aggressive shallow water fish. And it just so happens that a lot of those fish are kind of small or medium sized fish that I end up catching. I don't catch a lot of really big fish. So sometimes throwing a downsized presentation is crucial. And I've found that the Vision 110 Junior is awesome. So I really like it. Threw it around a little bit a couple days ago, and especially in that stained water. This GP Stain Reaction OB Orange Belly. Uh, at least I think that's what color this is. This could be a slightly different color pattern, but essentially we got a pearl white with an orange belly. Really like that color pattern. And that bait's also $5 less. So $20 for a Vision 110 Junior. And it still weighs 3/8 of an ounce and has an internal weight transfer system. So it casts really well. It fishes well. No real issues there, especially when using it on, I use it on 12-pound tests. So those are kind of my go-to baits when it comes to a jerk bait for the most part. That's my starting point. But I picked up 2 jerk baits in this off season to play around with because they're new to the market and are already super popular, and for good reason. Okay, first is the Berkeley Stunna. This is the color that I picked up most recently. This is like a fire craw type of color. Very rare thing that you would see in a jerk bait is a red color, but I decided to throw this, especially in the stained water that I was fishing. One, so the fish could see it, but two, so that I could see it and really get a feel for what this thing does. This was designed by Hank Cherry, who, if you don't know, won the Bassmaster Classic back-to-back years, last year and the year before. Was going for a three-peat, but struck out this year. So anyway, this bait here is a slow sinking jerk bait that dives some 4 to 6 feet deep. It is 112 millimeters, and I want to say it's a half ounce as well. Has that kind of same weight transfer system in it where you get those roller balls. And this thing has a slow sink. So I would say it sinks at maybe a foot every 2 seconds, maybe a little slower than that even. So it's a nice slow sink where you can see it falling. It's not going to plummet down, so you can control the depth, especially depending on how you work the bait. If you're twitching down, it's going to dive down to its maximum depth, and it will stay at that depth. And then obviously, if you want, you can count it down further than that, accounting for maybe 2 or 3 seconds per foot, however much deeper than that you want to go. They do make this in a +1 version that dives a few feet deeper than that. So where this thing is like a 3 to 6 foot diver, I would say the other one is like a 6 to 9 foot diver. And then obviously you can count it down further than that. Now, the shape of this bait with its flat belly and its semi-flat sides but rounded back, it's got a decent amount of flash and a great darting action to it. First impressions of this bait are really good. Obviously, with that slow sink, you get a little bit more of like a dying shad type of look to it. So, first impressions of this bait are that I really like this thing. Um, I'm not exactly sure when I'm going to use it. Probably in deeper water, and when the water is just a little bit warmer than it is right now, and I want to work this bait a little quicker. So when the water's super cold, I'm going to be throwing a Vision 110 or a Spromic stick or a dual hardcore minnow, something else that's going to suspend really well for me in that shallow to mid diving depth range. Something that's got 3 hooks on it. Is kind of my preference. So I like this bait. So far, so good. I'm into it. Ba, ba, ba. Matt says it maybe. I just have way more confidence throwing something I know most people are throwing near me. Okay. Okay. Edo Shiner. Money. Casts further than the 110. Catches a lot bigger fish. Caught my PB on one. Okay. Good to know. I appreciate you mentioning that. Now, why, other than it being able to cast a little bit further? One, why does it cast further? Two, why does it catch bigger fish, Matt? Um, Let us in on that, because the Edo Shiner is one of the few jerk baits that I do not have in my arsenal, but I would say is like kind of on my radar. Um, I've heard a lot of things about it, but I don't really know enough about it to quite convince me. I know it's got a taller profile, represents a slightly different bait fish, but you tell us. Okay. Ray says, never mind, didn't realize you were on a theme tonight. The spawn is in full swing with low to mid 60s here. Sweet, dude. Catch you Arctic anglers later. The stunna is great. More than I can count. Caught were this year. Sweet, Ray. That is awesome to hear. Yeah, Arctic anglers. We're not necessarily just talking about spring, but I'm mentioning really um, my observations on a few baits that are new to me that I picked up this off season and had a chance to throw around the other day for a short little while. Just kind of explaining what I've noticed about them, how they differ from other baits on the market. Um, and I'll keep you guys updated as I throw these baits more throughout the pre-spawn and throughout the year. But technically speaking, yeah, we're on a theme here tonight, and it's you know spring bass fishing. You're a little bit ahead of us. We talked about this earlier, in that it's interesting to note that at this time of year we've got a really wide range where people like me are fishing in water that's in the 40s, and even more extreme than that, people up north are still frozen. And then we've got people down south like you and Eliza, who are in the spawn or in post spawn right now. And there's such a wide spectrum of what people are doing to catch fish right now, that we're not always all speaking the same language. So I hear you 1,000%. Michael says the fire crow is a sweet color of the stone. I'm sure other companies are going to come out with something similar for this time of year. Can't wait till they make a junior version. Yeah, I hope they make a Stunna Junior as well, but I highly doubt it's going to be a 3 hook model. And that, to me, you know, I'm really big on 3 hook jerk baits, and there are now a few manufacturers that are making smaller profile 3 hook jerk baits, but it's still a super rare thing to do. And if Berkeley did that, I would be all about it, but I just highly doubt that's going to happen. Ray says, but I also tried the $5 Academy jerk bait. My 6-year-old was catching with them, catching them with me using both. Right place, wrong bait, 100%. More important than the right bait, wrong place. Yeah, well, you're absolutely right about that. If you're around the fish and they're biting anything, doesn't quite matter what you're throwing. Um, if you're in the wrong place, it also doesn't quite matter what you're throwing. If there aren't fish or they're not biting, you could be the best fisherman in the world. You could be throwing the coolest baits, the best baits, the newest thing that they've never been exposed to, and you're still not going to catch them. So you're absolutely right about that. Okay, so the other bait that I want to talk about that is new to me and also relatively new to the market is the 13 fishing, um, the Loco Special 110. So just like the Stunna, they make this thing in a standard and in a +1. And Brian Latimer made a video on this bait specifically in the +1 the other day, and was talking it up big time. Now he was fishing in water that was like mid 50s, and so he was fishing a jerkbait super fast, and it's a little bit different than say what I'm running into right now. But one other thing I didn't mention about the Stunna before I move on is that the hooks that come on this thing are Berkeley Fusion EWG trebles stock out of the package, and they are super sticky. I don't typically prefer EWGs on my jerk baits, but if it is the right kind of hook, then I'm down for it. So the reason I mentioned that is that the 13 Fishing Loco Special comes with Mustad short shank triple grips on it straight out of the pack. So also a great hook that I like, but I might end up swapping these out because when you get a bait like a jerk bait, you get a lot of fish that end up swiping at it, hitting it, trying to kill the bait as opposed to just wolf the entire thing. And in my opinion, an EWG hook is better for when fish are eating the bait because it will pin them better, but a round bend treble hook is better for when fish are swiping at a bait because that wider gap, the round bend being out as opposed to tucked in, will catch a fish that's just swiping at, hitting a bait, as opposed to actually wolfing it. So you will hook up with more fish on a round bend, and you will pin and land more fish on an EWG. And that's just a theory, right? Not necessarily true in all instances. But this Loco Special is in that same class as the Stunna. So this is a high-end jerkbait that retails for like 15 or 16 bucks. You can see that it's got a weight up here as well as two roller balls as a weight transfer system. Now, this bait had a slightly different action than I was expecting, and more of a rebound effect. So when this thing darts, then it will right itself and sit nose down and have a slow float up, at least in super cold water. Um, it took me a couple minutes to really understand what this bait was doing and try and wrap my head around why or if I liked it. But I will say that the action of the bait in how it dances um, is solid. I like it well enough. I can't say that I'm in love with this bait immediately, whereas the Stunna, um, I was really impressed. I thought that its action, the way that it darted, was a little bit more crisp than the Loco Special. Um, and so I was just a little bit weirded out by how it tipped up every time after it darted, and then it wanted to kind of slowly come up. Whereas the Stunna is the opposite, has a very crisp darting side to side, and then kind of stayed and then slowly sinks down. So you almost get the opposite effect with these baits. And I like the posture of the Stunna better than I do with the Loco Special. And that's just me. Everybody's got their own preference in terms of how a bait ought to sit in the water. Um, so those were a couple that I tried in the jerkbait category for sure. So Matt says for the Edo Shiner, it's a little bit heavier and more aerodynamic, but the profile is taller. and it has a more aggressive jerk to it. And on the paws, it wiggles just like the Evoke, but more of a quiver on the paws because it has a dimple in the lip to allow the bait to have an immediate response and allow to get down quicker. Okay, that's kind of a lot going on, but good to know. So more aggressive action. So perhaps the Vision 110 is best for, late fall, winter, early spring, and then as it starts to heat up, in comes the Edo Shiner for more of like a true pre-spawn jerkbait bite. Perhaps, maybe I'm wrong there. I don't know. Justin says I'm more hyped for the Shimano World Minnow. I'm pretty excited about that too. I haven't seen a lot of like action videos of that bait, but there's definitely a lot of hype around it because it seems like there's some technology in the bait, and I'm not talking about Livingston lures and technology in the way of like it making noise, but rather the spring that's loaded in it, the flash and the vibration that it puts out. So um, it's more built into the action of the bait than the castability, but both are supposed to be pretty great. And so I'm excited to see and eventually try that bait too. Though it is an expensive one. I think it's $20, right? Maybe a little bit more. But now, let's talk about flat-sided crankbaits because I think we talked about lipless, talked about jerk baits. Now we should talk about flat sides. Um, so two baits that are new to me that I wanted to make a point to try. And I talked about this a little bit last week, but one is the Spro Little John 50. So this is not a new bait on the market by any means. They did just make this bait in a rattling version, which I do intend to pick up at some point. So this is a semi narrow bait. It is a flat-sided bait for sure, but it's not super skinny. So if I compare it to say, the Evergreen Flat Force, the Flat Force is a little bit narrower, and the Little John 50 is a smaller profile. So being 50 millimeters, it's a small body crankbait. I like that. And I like the action of this thing. It does dive a little bit deeper than I thought. It dives a legit 3 to 5 or 4 to 6 feet deep. So I was making legitimate contact with the bottom like the whole way back, and was not necessarily expecting that, but like the vibration and the action of this bait for sure. It has a narrow, like it doesn't travel wide, but it has a decent roll to it. I don't know exactly how to explain. Like the tail kicks, but this thing is not traveling far off of center, so it tracks straight, but it has a good kick to it. So it it has some vibration. You can feel this thing all the way back, and I'm immediately a fan of it. I like that bill shape being kind of a hybrid between a round and a square bill. Now and it casts really well, having that soft tungsten weight transfer system in it. Um, I'm a fan for sure. So you will hear and see me talking about the Little John 50 more this year. That is for sure. Um, I'm liking it. Half-ounce bait at 2 inches long. Now, the other bait that we've all been curious about is the Rapala OG Tiny. So same size bait as the Little John 50. Tiny little guy, especially when you compare it to, say, its bigger brother in the OG Slim 6, right? The OG Slim 6 is a much bigger profile, more standard profile flat side crankbait that dives to 6 feet, whereas the Slim dives, the Tiny dives to 4 feet. So the other thing to note is the width of these baits. The Slim is pretty standard. I would say it's about the same as the Flat Force. Whereas the OG Tiny is a really skinny bait. And so that's what I was trying to imitate with my two homemade baits, right? That I showed to you guys. Is really trying to imitate that really narrow profile. And I will say, because of that, what you get with this bait is not a great cast. It's fine, surprisingly fine for what it is. I was not disappointed with the casting distance on this bait, but I was not impressed either. It's a balsa bait that weighs like, I don't know. You guys tell me. Is it 5/16 of an ounce? It's close to a quarter. So this is a light bait that a lot of people would consider spinning rod territory. I threw this on a bait caster on my crankbait setup, which I've got 12-pound line on, and I dialed it in just fine and was able to cast it a good, 30 yards or so, and had no issues. Now, diving depth is proper. The action on this thing is great. It engages immediately. So whereas my homemade crankbait, I've got to kind of pull it to get it going. This thing um, has an awesome action straight out of the gate. I really, really like the way that this thing looks underwater. But because of how narrow it is really subtle. And so I think you need to have light line in order to really be able to feel what your bait is doing. So I noticed that on that 12-pound line that I really had to pay attention, especially in windy conditions, to feel the bait. Uh, and that could have just been my first time using the bait, my experience with it, but I felt like it was rather subtle. So something to note about the OG Tiny is that it is a subtle bait. Nothing wrong with that. In fact, I felt it engaged the whole time. So let's, not about to make comparisons to say, the Jackhammer Stealth Blade, which I've had gripes about. Told you guys that I don't think that bait is worth the money. It does not vibrate consistently the whole time for me. And for a high dollar bladed jig, I want that thing thumping hard, and I want it making contact the whole time. I want to be able to feel what that bait is doing underwater. Um, I mean, really, that's the whole point. So, while we're on the topic of chatterbaits, we can go there for a minute because there's one bait I want to talk about. Matt says, you're spot on, Tyler. It excels in that 50 to 60 degree water. Okay, that sounds about right. All right, guys. Now, how about the Chatterbait Mini Max? This was a bait that was released last year. Some people have gone so far as to call this a downsized jackhammer, but it's not, right? Um, it is downsized. Okay, the blade is probably 40% smaller. Um, it's definitely cute. It instead of a 4/0 hook on it, it's got a 2/0 hook on it, and so I've got that Z-Man Baby Goat trailer on there. I've cut down the skirt just a little bit, and I will say right away that I'm impressed with this bait. My expectations were very middle of the road going into using this bait. And straight away, I'm impressed. I really do like the action of it. It also is more subtle, but has a good middle of the road vibration to it and a steady, constant vibration. So, one thing I've talked about with chatterbaits is I don't know what just poked me, but the eye, the eyelet here where the blade is attached, I think it's kind of important how big this eyelet is so that it gives the blade freedom to travel side to side. Okay. It's not all that important that it's making constant contact with the head and making a whole lot of racket under the water, but it does need to travel freely because on a lot of the other old chatterbaits, either this eyelet was too tight or there was too much paint, attached to that eyelet or to the blade, and this thing would get stuck. And you'd almost have to reel it faster. You have to pop the bait to get it to start working again. And this thing is great. So I will be buying more of the mini maxes. Um, and I will definitely use them in smaller bodies of water. I will throw them when, say, a jackhammer bite dies down, or I'm just trying to imitate a smaller bait fish, something like that. Um, yeah, I think it's a great bait for sure. Is it as good as a jackhammer? No, I mean I don't think anything will stand up to the jackhammer straight up. I'm You guys know I'm a diehard fan of the jackhammer chatterbait and will be probably forever. So where I tried the big blade chatterbait late last season, and it took me 2 outings to get used to this thing. My first impression was, golly, that thing pulls way too hard. I don't know how to quite fish it right. This blade displaces too much water. The bait is heavy. The hook is giant, and you're gonna have to fish it on a heavy rod and heavy line, and it's almost like a different technique. That is not necessarily the case with the Mini Max. Now, you could size down your gear and your line and be just fine with this thing because it is more subtle. And if you want to fish it deeper, then by all means. But that hook is still a medium gauge wire. Um, so I wouldn't go with too light of a power of a rod, but you could downsize your line for sure. And yeah, I mean, I really like the bait. Whereas the big blade took me 2 different times to figure out how to use it. And ultimately, I had to step up a power on my rod and throw this thing on a true heavy power. Um, in an ideal world, I'd have a heavy power, moderate fast action rod, but I don't. So I threw it on a heavy power fast action rod, and I liked it 10 times better than I liked it on my standard chatterbait setup, which is a medium heavy, moderate fast. And that medium heavy, moderate fast handles this guy, the Mini Max, just fine. But if you wanted to step down to like a medium power, something a little bit more along the lines of like a crankbait setup, you could definitely do that. Justin says, I grabbed 5 of each of those Mini Maxes. Well, good to hear because I think you're going to like it, dude. Michael says, OG Tiny or Berkeley Fritzside 5 Junior? Which one do you think is better? See, that I don't know yet. Like, I did not have the chance to throw all of the baits that I wanted to yet. One being, I thought I pulled it out. One being the Chick Magnet from Strike King. I did not throw this one yet. So you get a similar profile as the OG Slim 6. with the chick magnet and a similar diving depth. I want to say this is in like the 4 to 6 foot range. So you might be able to get it to go a little bit shallower than with the slim. But essentially, these guys are in the same class. It's just this is a balsa bait that is silent, high float, and this is a plastic bait with a subtle rattle in it. And those are the main differences between the baits, but really designed kind of for the same application. Now, the Fritside 5 Junior, I also brought with me, but did not try out the other day. No real good reason other than just I was somewhat limited on time. I threw probably 8 different baits, almost 10 different baits in a 2-hour session, and half of them were just because I wanted to get a feel for what the bait looked like in the water, how it felt, and I didn't get around to using the chick magnet or the Fritside 5 Junior. But I think the Fritside 5 Junior is going to be, I think it's a little bit lighter or close to the same weight as the OG Slim Tiny. And it's a smaller profile. So take a look at this. The OG Tiny is a bigger bait than the Fritside 5 Junior. This guy's going to dive, 3 or 4 feet. And this guy's going to dive more like 2 to 4 feet. It feels like it's going to be a little bit shallower of a diver than the OG Tiny, but I felt that the OG Tiny was not a very deep diver, and I was happy about that actually. So um, it depends on what you're going for, but I think this is going to be a great bait and one that I'm going to use for sure. I'm actually looking into getting some of the 5 biggins as well, which is the opposite end of the spectrum. It's like the same size as the 9, but just in a shallower diving depth like the 5. So that's one bait that I did not have the chance to try. Couple baits I didn't have the chance to try. So anyway, the only other bait that I did throw for a while because I was trying to get bit as opposed to just test baits was a swim bait, and specifically the 7-inch Megabass Spark Shad on I think an 8/0 owner beast hook. So I've showed you guys this bait before. I thought it would be perfect for the water conditions. Yeah, theoretically, could I have thrown maybe a mag draft instead? I mean, maybe, but I like this bait a lot, and I wanted to be throwing it, so I did. Just didn't catch any on it. I feel like it's a slightly better bait for throwing in really cold water because it's got more of a tail kick that's dramatic than the mag draft, which is a little bit more speed sensitive and needs to be fished on like a true straight medium speed retrieve to get that right action where it's actually kicking and wagging. Whereas that 7-inch Spark Shad um, has more bend. It's more like the Kitech where you get a lot more tail kick at slow speed. So I fished it slow and on bottom out as deep as I could. So just didn't get bit the other day, and it is what it is. But those are primarily going to be the baits that I continue to stick with over the next few weeks or this next month as the water stays in the 40s, climbs over 50, and we start to get into the pre-spawn. I'm going to stick with those cold water baits. So lipless crankbait, jerk bait, flat-sided crankbait, uh, swim bait are going to be my main ones, but I will mix a jig of multiple varieties in there. Um, I will throw a chatterbait from time to time, depending on the conditions. And I will throw you know, a jig, whether it's a finesse jig, a football jig, um, something that I'm going to move generally a little bit slower, but in higher percentage areas. And then I will also throw something like a finesse swim bait that's not, a larger style swim bait, whether it's a soft plastic or a large glide bait. And so swim baits kind of run the gamut. But I'm excited to try this new, Scottsboro tackle Yum swim bait that I just picked up a week or two ago. See what the action looks like on these things. So that pretty much does it. But let's catch up on comments. Talk about anything else you guys want to talk about. The audience is dropping off. I don't know it rapidly for some reason. I don't know if it's my internet connection or just that it's getting late. But it's almost 11 o'clock here my time. Um, but yeah, we got 6 people in here. People are dropping off. What's going on? Matt says I got some baits coming from the hookup and got some more bottom baits. And that spinner that they make looks very interesting. Has a scrounger head movement, but in a spinner bait. Never seen that before. Me neither. Other than that Ketchco spinner bait that has like 3 split rings on it and make it do that like what do they call it? The cyclone, something like that. Tom, I don't know if you're still in here or not, but if you are, you have a great rest of your night. Old man, get some sleep. Thank you for hanging out tonight. I appreciate you. And Michael says Mini Max looks great for certain scenarios. Yeah, I agree with, especially in high pressured bodies of water where forage is small or where bass in general are small. I think the small profile and the slightly subdued vibration compared to a jackhammer will get bit really well. So, here's an interesting topic or conversation that say came up on Debo's live stream tonight is the cycle, the in and out that happens with a lot of lures. So, that whole like, is the whopper plopper dead, for example? Well, no, it's not dead, and quite honestly, it's never going to be dead. Debo's point was, well, everybody still throws a whopper plopper, so it's not like you can't catch fish on them. It's just technically speaking, the whopper plopper was all the rage a handful of years ago, and caught the snot out of them. It's like the fish had never seen it before, and so there was a window of time where you could catch a remarkably high number of fish on a bait like a whopper plopper. Um, and that has started to come down to life or reality, if you will. So it's not like the whopper plopper is dying by any means. It's just that fish are more used to it now, just like they've always been used to a spinner bait and a buzz bait, crankbait. So it's how do you fish it? Um, or do you use a slightly different version? Do you use the Chapo instead of the Whopper Plopper? Do you use the new Depths one if you're willing to fork up the money for it? How do you use the same technique but a slightly different bait, different size, different sound, whatever it is? And so, same thing applies to, say, the Jackhammer Chatterbait. I think we are still in the middle or perhaps toward the tail end of like the heyday that is the jackhammer chatterbait. I mean, people are and fish, not just people, but everybody's going nuts about the jackhammer chatterbait and has been for years. So the question is, at what point are the fish going to just know that sound and say, you know what, last year I got caught 3 times from that freaking bait. I can hear it. I know it's not real. I know it's annoying, and I really, really want to go shut that thing up and kill it, but I know better. I'm not going to eat that. Um, Maybe that'll happen. I expect that it will in certain bodies of water at a certain point, or maybe every body of water at a certain point. So in comes something like the Mini Max as opposed to something like the Stealth Blade jackhammer. The Stealth Blade is more of like a clear water chatterbait, and it's a totally different sound that you get. The Mini Max is just the subdued version of the jackhammer. I like it. I like it a lot, and I think you're right about that, and you're going to like it too. Michael says, "What's your 6-inch mag draft setup with the treble hook?" You mean like the standard mag draft that comes with a treble hook? Or are you asking like on a mag draft freestyle and adding a stinger hook to it? Because honestly, I do still use the same setup. I don't use two different rods for my swim baits. I still prefer something that is, I use the Daiwa Fury 795 swim bait rod. So what I like about it is that it handles swim baits up to 4 ounces. I mean, really, if we're being honest, three ounces is probably uh, the tail end of the sweet spot. But it's perfect for a 6-inch mag draft, and it has a medium heavy power, but more of like a moderate fast action, and so it loads up really well on a cast. You can drive home the hook well on a weedless uh, swim bait if you're using something with like a keel weighted belly hook, like a beast hook. But it also does really well at loading up if you just need to sweep set something with a treble hook like you get out of a standard mag draft. So um, I do use a Dobbins Fury 795 swim bait rod with a Shimano Tranx 300 and 20-pound fluorocarbon. Really for most of my swim bait situations, it's just I retrieve the baits and set the hook differently with all of them, right? Matt says sort of same thing with swim baits. Probably only reason I get the number one or number of bites I do with them is because not many people are using them, and when they see me fishing, they ask what I'm fishing for. Yeah, I get the same thing whenever I'm throwing big baits, right? Uh, you know, you take something like a Jackal Gantarelle out there, and and you make your retrieve, and you pull it up out of the water, and somebody's gonna say, "Oh, look, he caught a fish," um, and you can't help but just chuckle, right? Doesn't matter what you're throwing. Could even just be like a 6-inch paddle tail. It's still big enough to where a lot of people are like, "Whoa, what is that? Like, is that a real fish or is that a lure? What are you doing? What'd you catch? What are you fishing for?" Uh, I absolutely understand that sentiment. Well, that is the end of my beer. Our audience has dropped off. We've been on for an hour and 44 minutes. It's a little after 11 o'clock here, my time, 1 o'clock on the East Coast. So let's just kind of end it there. Matt says, "Oh, Tyler, forgot to tell you, finally got my UFO crankdown coming after waiting almost 5 months because I had to return it. He sent me the wrong one, had to make a new one. Dang." Michael, I have not used the Namazu yet, but I have a couple packs of them, and I'm excited to try them for sure. Where did I put them? I showed him in one of my last videos. And a couple of my bodies of water have a fair number of catfish. So I think it'll make a great drop shot bait, great free rig bait. Um, Jika rig, Tokyo rig, that kind of thing. So I'll throw it on most of those setups and techniques, and I will certainly report back to you. I will throw it in a lot of areas where I'm also going to be using more JDM specific soft plastics, like the Geek Crack soft plastics, like the Depths Cover Scat, and a handful of others that are kind of on my mind, as well as the some of the Maxent baits that just have a faster fall and a higher salt content in them. So yeah, thanks for asking, but I don't fully know the answer. Well, the answer to your question is no, I haven't used it, but yes, I do have it. And it does look like a great bait where catfish are in the water. I don't think it necessarily needs to be where catfish are in the water, because it's not just going to imitate a catfish. I think it will imitate um, a goby. I think it will imitate a crawfish. I think it will imitate, uh, kind of anything that is bottom dwelling, as well as a baby catfish. So yeah, I think it'll be a good bait. But as for the action and the durability and the value that you get in it overall, I don't know. That's TBD, right? So I'll keep you guys posted about that. All right, guys, I am out of here. Hour and 47 minutes. It's been a super fun time tonight. Thank you for hanging out. Thank you for contributing in the chat and hanging out. Hope you guys have a great rest of your weekend. Sunday tomorrow. I am working tomorrow, not fishing, unfortunately. So I got to get to sleep and get some rest before work tomorrow. So, guys, I appreciate you. If you haven't already, hit the thumbs up button. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel, and I will see you guys in the next one. I have a package coming, so keep your eyes peeled. Have those notifications on, because I'm going to go live. Um, definitely in the next 5 days, but I don't know when. Okay. Bye.